Hey everybody, Chuck Johnson here. It is April 18th. Just came back from LA. Went to wife's thing down there. It was kind of fun. Uh, Drank a bunch, didn't have my equipment, couldn't do the podcast. My apologies. But yeah, so a lot of people have been writing to me asking me to weigh in on like the alt-right. What is the alt-right? Who are the alt-right? And they pointed me to a few things. They pointed me to this new Vox article. I'll be linking that in the comments. They pointed me to the Milo Yiannopoulos, Alum Bakari piece. And obviously there's been the stuff that I've done against Jamie Kirchick and the pieces that have been written in National Review. There's one in commentary. So let me just kind of there's a lot of discussion about what is the alt-right. And I guess I'm sort of on the ground floor here, given that I'm friends with Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Molebug, friends with Reactionary Duck, or Jokocracy, Pax Dickinson's business partner. And of course, like a lot of the targets I've chosen for journalistic projects over the years have been topics that are greatly interested by the, of great interest to the alt-right. Now, what does the alt-right believe? Well, this is a tricky topic to go into, but let me just kind of lay out how I see it. I think that there's skepticism. Skepticism is basically the reigning behavior of the alt-right. And it's skepticism about a lot of the claims of modernity, a lot of the claims of this sort of liberal, progressive, so-called utopia that we live in. And the skepticism is most empirically felt, and most sincerely felt, I should say, by white males. And so that's why when Jamie Kirchick and others attack NPI for being too white or too white male, that they're really not really understanding what's going on. A lot of people who are young and white and male are starting to realize, a lot of young white men, I should say, are starting to realize that the system is sort of stacked against them. And they're starting to rebel. Whether that's in the form of a conservatism Inc. that doesn't allow for new people to join in, whether it's in the form of a discriminatory college environment in which even if you get into these top schools, you better stay quiet because you're a cisgendered white male. And so what's starting to happen is they're starting to rebel. At a more crazy level, you see this in the form of the shooter in South Carolina who killed all those folks. Dylann Roof, I think his name was. And what you're seeing with him, and if you read his manifesto, which I recommend, I actually wrote a post on this at one point, is you're seeing a bunch of people who are starting to say enough is enough. This idea that that white males are terrible, that they're evil, that they're uniquely responsible for all the terrible things in the world and none of the good things, is really getting too crazy. And so Roof is, if you read his manifesto, he talks about how Barack Obama's insistence on the Trayvon Martin thing made him a racist. And so you have this sort of, if Black Lives Matter, white lives must matter too, kind of interplay going on here. And this is an interesting phenomenon. I mean, this is something that's not really been fully explored, fully discussed in the larger public. And it's something that needs to be fully understood. Now, what's happening? Now, there are all these white males who in our society, they front one way. So, they work as a stockbroker, or they work as a software engineer, or as a commercial litigator. And in the evenings or in the downtime, and let's face it, there's a lot of downtime at high IQ professions, particularly in finance and some forms of law. What they do is they have these alt-right, shitlord accounts or Twitter accounts. They basically have a hidden identity that they use. And it's through this hidden identity and the anonymity, the relative anonymity that Twitter affords, and some of these technologies afford, that they're able to actually organize and plan raids. So things like TRS, things like NPI, these are all basically organizations that have less than $500,000 in funding. And they're quite menacing and frightening to a lot of the conservatives, that is to say the establishment conservative types, who have sort of a globalist view of the world. Why are they so threatening? Well, partly they're threatening because it's it's a fight for the future of what the conservative soul is going to be about. What is conservatism? And this is a problem that people haven't really contended with. Is it just the strength of our ideas? Well, no. I mean, these ideas were clearly a product of a people, and these people came from certain places. If you read Albion's Seed, you'll know that they came from sort of 4 distinct places in Britain, sort of the settler stock of the United States, and that this culture sort of permeated most of our society. Now, why is this interesting? Well, for those of us who are under 35, we have basically been told over and over and over again that no matter how hard we work, no matter what grades we get in schools, no matter what wars we fight in and so forth, that we're essentially expendable, those of us who are white and male. And that is a serious problem. You can be valedictorian of your class. You can have the top grades. You could survive the relatively feminized education environment. And nonetheless, it's not enough. You can have perfect SAT scores, but you're probably not going to go to Harvard, Stanford, etc., because you are white. And so that is a serious problem that no one has really figured out how to solve. And you see this in all kinds of ways. You see this in the form of this push lately on the part of Silicon Valley to fund startups by women or minorities, even though these startups don't really do all that well, even though they don't actually give that much of a return. In fact, you could probably have created a really good fund just betting against the various progressive startups. And you see this in the form of, say, Theranos wastes $9 billion in 6 months by eradicating its valuation. And this is a woman-backed startup. Marissa Mayer has had all sorts of problems running Yahoo. And so each of these kind of women-based companies got lots of money. They got lots of LP money. They got lots of institutional cathedral money. And that's sort of what's going on here. Now, what is my strategy? All right, so this is the diagnosis. The diagnosis is that basically in our system, in our society right now, white men occupy the place of most hated. And every society has this. I mean, in Hitler's Germany, these are extreme examples. But in Hitler's Germany, you had the Jew, right? The Jew was the problem. In Soviet Russia, it was the kulaks. In communist China, it was the capitalists, the reactionaries, I think what they were calling the capitalist class. And so in every one of these societies, you have groups that it's okay to hate. And that's, that might be something just hardwired into human nature. But what should we do? What should those of us who are on the hated side of things do? Well, one thing that should be thought about, and this is something that I think the alt-right should take seriously, is we need to start forming our own institutions and hiring our own people. And this doesn't necessarily need to be, in violation of the law. So we should always hire people who are the most qualified, in keeping with federal law. So taking that very seriously, we should follow that. But we need to have certain institutions that are set up. So we need something like a lawfare project where we go and we sue to do things like get the records of Jackie Coakley or Michael Brown's juvenile criminal records. We need a crowdfunding vehicle which induces people to leak information or does bounties and does opposition research. And that's sort of what Pax and I are building at WeSearcher. We need a hedge fund, so something that could actually profit off of the collapse of the cathedral's institutions. We need to be thinking very seriously about IQ research and about ways in which we can use IQ to short the need for higher education. And so what we should be doing, in essence, is we should be looking at the way in which the cathedral operates, media, education, government, and we should be thinking about ways in which to essentially end those institutions. If the last 50 years were about, or the last 60 years were about progressives essentially destroying social institutions of the society at writ large, the next 50 years need to be about unwinding a lot of these terrible institutions. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a right or left phenomenon. I mean, I honestly think that Bernie Sanders is onto something when he talks about just how massively indebted the millennial generation is relative to other generations. But his solution of essentially offering free college to everyone doesn't make a lot of sense for all sorts of reasons. Just like Milo Yiannopoulos' proposal on the privilege grant to go and give money to college students is kind of a dumb, in my view, a dumb move. We shouldn't be thinking about ways in which white males can go to college. We should we should hold on a sec. Somebody's messaging me. We should be thinking about ways in which we can change a lot of the conversation in the country writ large. Now, I think, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is why participate in a system rigged against you? In a way, Trump is sort of showing this, and Cruz to a certain extent as well is showing this. But this is our modern political system is more or less set up to have certain victors and losers. Just like when you read a book or read a novel, or you watch a movie, they're heroes and they're villains. They're villains and heroes, right? And in many respects, our media sets up these narratives. They set up this idea of a hero or a villain. And so one of the things you can do is embrace the role of the villain. Some of the best villains throughout history have actually been heroes. They've sort of been anti-hero types. So for instance, if you go and watch, X-Men, is a great example that I use. Magneto is correct about the way in which the humans are going to take advantage of mutants and start killing them. And he's right, while the kind of pussyfooted Charles Xavier is wrong about trying to basically protect the humans. And you see this with like a lot of really serious villains, is that they always have some sort of raison d'etre. They have some sort of like real compelling interest, and it's what drives them. It's what makes them interesting. It's what ultimately doesn't really make them villains. It makes them, one can be on an opposite team. So my basic read on how the conversation writ large is going in this country is that we need to start thinking more and more about creating different institutions. And these institutions need to have certain rules and policies in place. And then we should really take a lesson from both how the Communist Party and the Nazi Party and various other high-energy political movements throughout history have organized themselves to avoid entryism. That is, people coming in and taking over, supplanting things. And one of the things we can do is do a really good job on an intelligence service, to do a really good job vetting people and do a really good job exposing, the sort of lies that go on here. Now, for me, the alt-right is the following. It's skepticism about modernity, skepticism about liberal democracy, skepticism about society at large. Now, I don't think you necessarily need to go down the route of like being a monarchist. I think I've been reading the new book by Andrew Roberts about Napoleon, which I had read a while back, but I didn't fully understand why Napoleon was so significant until I read John Toland's biography of Adolf Hitler, which I think came out like 1980s, 1990s. Anyways, it's been and what I was struck with is how in chaotic economic environments and in chaotic macroeconomic environments that there are all sorts of opportunities that are created. Hitler and Napoleon came to power in large measure because the economic environment, the old regime, the ancien regime, was so discredited. And what's really going on right now is there's a whole lot of discrediting going on of our kind of modern progressive era. And those of us who are best at showing how discredited it is are oftentimes being purged and oftentimes being attacked for it. So, for instance, one of the things that I have done is I've looked for soft targets. That is to say, things that are easy to expose, relatively cheap, and things in which the journalists are going to give you a monopoly. Those are things like anything that's related to feminism. If you're breaking a story involving feminism, you're pretty much going to have the territory to yourself. Any corruption within the feminist movement, any feminist icons who aren't as what they seem to be, you're going to get a lot of traffic, you're going to get a lot of attention. It's essentially what I did with Jackie Coakley in the University of Virginia rape hoax, and what I did with some other rape hoaxes along the way, like the one at Columbia. The second target, or the second thing, is anti-racism, religion, ideology. There is a religious view in our society right now that all people are the same, and I think this tradition comes out of the egalitarian movements of most major faiths. Lee Kuan Yew famously says that Lee Kuan Yew, the sort of benevolent dictator of Singapore, said that every religion starts with the premise that all men are equal, and this is a self-evident precept, but nothing could be further from the truth. Humans are not all equal, and it's the duty of statescraft, and I paraphrase here, it's the duty of statescraft basically to make, in his society, the Chinese to be the best Chinese possible, the whites to be the best whites possible, the Malays to be the best Malays possible, and that really they would all be benefited by the best rising to the top. Our society doesn't really do that anymore. Our society has decided that that if you're smart, you're going to be okay. That you're not going to you're not going to really worry. So you can see this in the form of how we've gutted a lot of gifted and talented programs, or how we have forced a lot of societies. There were high IQ societies to admit other races that are not necessarily as intelligent as Jews, Northern European whites, and Asians. Now. And by the way, yeah, it's not to say that there aren't occasionally intelligent blacks, just that their frequency in the population is relatively low. And generally when they are intelligent, it's usually because there's been some racial admixture with some other ethnic group, which explains why blacks in the United States, which tend to have a lot more white blood in them, are actually kind of even more intelligent relative to Africa. Or relative to large chunks of Africa. So there's skepticism about anti-racism. So anytime you have any data that shows that crime rates that are different, anytime you show rape rates are different, these are things that are very deeply unpopular. That's why the Obama administration has worked so hard to eradicate mentioning all racial statistics, until it serves, of course, their interests. But that's, that this idea that we are different from one another and that we shouldn't notice that is something that is quite frightening to the larger society. I one time worked at this foundation where one of the members of the board of the foundation, or actually one of the leaders of the foundation, said, it's our view that the frequency of black billionaires should be roughly equivalent to the frequency of blacks in the population. So 12%, 13%, 14% black population in the general population, that should be 13-14% blacks in the billionaire class. Of course, that's not how it actually works out. Jews are vastly overrepresented. See, I make the mistake myself. Jews are represented disproportionate to their actual numbers in the general population among the billionaire class. You have to sort of believe a fantasy that that basically that Jews are conspiring to be in that top thing, rather than just actually natively implying their intelligence. Having been on many of the listservs over the years of various Jewish organizations, I'm an anti-Semite, maybe even a philo-Semite. It's clear to me that there's no large conspiracy of Jews. It's just they tend to do quite well because they tend to be smarter, which is a function, I think, of the way they were selected for IQ. And you can read more about this in Gregory Cochrane's and Henry Harpening's book, The 10,000 Year Explosion, which I think is probably one of the greatest books lately. But yeah, so skepticism about anti-racism, skepticism about feminism, skepticism about democracy, skepticism about progressivism, that kind of world of skepticism about democracy, skepticism about federalism, skepticism about progressivism. These are the things that might appeal to conservatives, or at least conservatives of the sort of Declaration of Independence school, the Japhite school, of which I was once a member in good standing, the Claremont Institute school, and this idea that Declaration of Independence thinking, that Locke and Montesquieu and natural right understanding of human nature, that this is what really animates the world. I believe that that's probably true when you have a racially monogamous population. I think you could probably, or at least you have a binary racial population. So I think you could do natural rights teaching. You could have an old republic, but essentially we're probably never going to get back to that republic. And so what do we do? What kind of institutions do we build? These are very important questions and things that we need to be taking seriously. And I don't necessarily share the alt-right view that we need to just jettison the Declaration of Independence. We just need to jettison our traditions and our heritage. I think we need to understand why they failed and what kinds of things we can do to be bulwarks against that. Now, I watched the Stefan Mullen interview with this guy, Helmut Nordberg, which I recommend watching. It's quite interesting. I mean, it raises a lot of questions about IQ and about population and about civil war, and where the future, where the future's going. Is it going to be race war like that famous interview that was done a while back? I don't know, but I think it's the skepticism about everyone who says that we can have just some sort of multiracial democracy and it's all going to work out and don't you worry. I think that they're not quite understanding how human nature actually works. I don't think there's ever been a successful multiracial democracy or republic in human history, and it's hard to believe that there'll be one this time around. We shall see, but it's probably got to bet against it. So the next kind of thing to think seriously is skepticism on the Jewish question, the JQ, as people say. Now, I am pro-Jews. I have always been pro-Jews. I will always probably be pro-Jews. I have always thought of them as fellow nerds, the ones that are the smarter end of the spectrum, which is to say a lot of them. I think the frequency in the population is something like, for IQs above 130, there are 24 Jews for every 1,000 Jews. For every Northern European white, I think it's 8 for every 1,000. So the frequency of Jews with genius level IQ is roughly 3 times that of Northern European whites, which is in turn, I think, a magnitude higher for Africans, if you have people of African descent. And those figures come from 10,000-year explosion by Harpending and Gregory Cochrane, and I've seen similar things to indicate that that's true. So my sense is that if you think about a society in which people who have high IQ are disproportionately reaping the rewards of the information age, the sort of the way in which that world is going, if you think in those terms, then it perfectly makes sense that the people who have the higher IQs will benefit, and that many of those who will benefit will be Jews. Nevertheless, there is something to be said for people who treat Israel as if it's the 51st state rather than a sovereign nation who has policies that we can learn from, that we can respect. And one of the reasons that I find kind of the charge of anti-Semitism so distasteful is that those of us who love Israel and who love the culture of Israel, of being an ethno-state, and who think that Jews rightly should have a homeland, and that it's good for the world if they do, those of us who think that, we believe that Jews have things to teach us in the United States too, that Israelis have things to teach us, such as the importance of maintaining an identity, the importance of everyone serving to protect that identity, the importance of having a culture that fosters learning, the dangers of using parliamentarian first-past-the-post systems for representative democracies, which is a mistake. I think the Israeli constitution copied from the Weimar Republic. I know that was something that my old professor Harry Jaffe used to talk about. So my general sense is that one should be one should be skeptical of a lot of basically, shall we say, clannish. I mean, is that too far? Behavior on the part of Jews. But one should also come to appreciate some of the great creations that Jewish thinkers and Jewish thought have produced for all of us. We've all been sort of the beneficiary of high IQ people, and this idea that like Jews are uniquely responsible for all of history's problems, I think is not true. I know there's a user, John Rivers 2, and he said that when you have high IQs in a population, you have more extremes in the politics. And I think that that's evidently true among Jews that I know, that you have a high IQ population, you're more likely to get communists on the one hand, or you have fascists on the other. You're more likely to get extremes of different political persuasions. And so when it comes to skepticism, one should always be skeptical of different groups. One should look very seriously at the claims of ethnic nepotism. Humans are, after all, more tribal than they are ideological. But nonetheless, I think we should be a little hesitant on the name the Jew, stormfront approach. Now, what does this all have to do with each other? Now, why is this all interesting? my general sense is that all of these different groups together form a coalition, and the coalition is essentially a reset button on modernity. That's why you'll see a lot of people who are debating between Bernie Sanders on the one hand, on the far left, and Donald Trump on the supposed far right. And what each of these things are doing is they're building a coalition for overthrowing the status quo. And what ends up happening in societies in which there are revolutions is a coalition needs to form about not this anymore. And that coalition can include all different types of ethnic groups. It can include all different types of political groups. It can include communists and socialists and fascists and nationalists and so forth. But it needs to basically just give the finger to the existing prevailing status quo. And what's happening right now is that is organizing online. And that is happening as we speak. And the finances of sort of the global order and how globalization is coming to an end, which I've talked about before on some of my podcasts, that is now starting to happen. It's starting to make openings possible. And so our kind of liberal regime is discredited. Now, I'll be working on businesses over the next 10 to 15 years for the alt-right, because I happen to believe that one could make a lot of money if one were clever, but it's going to require funding sources, it's going to require volunteers, it's going to require good editors and good lawyers. The lesson here, if one were looking at the Communist Party, is one needs to sort of copy their teachings, right? Which is that one shouldn't just be, if you want to be a good member of the Communist Party, you need to be a good screenwriter, you need to be a good lawyer, you need to be a good, and so we need to have barriers to entry for people to come into the alt-right, to be a part of it. And then, nonetheless, if our ideas are true, which I think that a lot of these ideas are true, which separates me from some of the others who just do this for comedic effect. It would have been much easier for me professionally to ignore the teachings of the bell curve. It would have been much easier to go in and essentially assume the lie that feminism, that men and women are equal. It would have been much easier to go in a certain direction, but nonetheless, we can't really do that anymore. We have to sort of just move forward, and we have to, as Thomas Jefferson once said, there's not a truth known, I think known that I would not want known to the whole world, and I think that's something that should be our guiding light. I don't want to live in a society in which the Copernicuses or the Galileos of our day are persecuted. I don't want to live in a society in which the James Watsons, the Pax Dickinsons, the Helmut Nybergs, the John Derbyshires, the Joe Sobrins of the world are persecuted. And I think that this is something that we need to fight against. This is something we need to be on guard against, and we need to make sure that persecution is not an option anymore. Now, please write to me, editor@gotnews.com. Editor@gotnews.com. I'm always looking forward to hearing from people. And we just did a post about Super Mexican actually being a drunk driving Mexican. So my apologies to Donald Turrentine, who helped him set up his website and who helped him on some things, but we did find out who exactly it was. And I will leave you with, I'm going to give you some quotes to see you out that I found somewhat inspirational, that had sort of changed my thinking on a lot of questions. Let me see here. So these are some of the quotes that I have on Facebook. And by the way, you should friend me, Charles C. Johnson at Facebook. I'm currently being persecuted by Facebook because I made a joke about Muslims. These are the two quotes that I like the most. I have a whole bunch on there, but the two that I like the most are the best things and best people rise out of their separateness. I'm against a homogenized society because I want the cream to rise. And that was Robert Frost, who's one of my favorite poets. The other, and this is a Steinbeck quotation, and after this I'm going to sign off and go do something else. But I think it's worth recalling. And this, I believe, that the free exploring mind of the individual human is the most valuable thing in the world. And this I would fight for the freedom of the mind to take any direction it wishes undirected. And this I must fight against, any idea, religion, or government which limits or destroys the individual. This is what I am and what I am about. I can understand why a system built on a pattern must try to destroy the free mind, and for that is the one thing which by inspection destroys such a system. Surely I can understand this, and I hate it, and I will fight against it to preserve the one thing that separates us from the uncreative beasts. If that glory can be killed, we are lost. And that's Steinbeck, East of Eden, page 131. Always looking forward to hearing from you guys. I have a lot of thoughts this week. I'll be working on some projects over at gotnews.com. Be working on some things over here on the podcast. But I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. Looking forward to taking some questions from you. Please share this thing. Please subscribe, and let's chat soon.